Welcome to episode 19 of Building Blocks of Brendan. Today you connect with Max Lieberman, the CEO and founder of Liebs Co, to really learn about his story and how he founded his business. What Liebs Co does is it creates training programs to help organizations and employees better understand disability through in-person training, online modules, and workshops to really allow for an equal opportunity for everyone to succeed. Similar to many entrepreneurs, Max had an experience, saw a problem, and went out to solve it. What Max realized when graduating from university was that many organizations weren't able to accommodate individuals. Having many stories of how this occurred to himself, Max realized that there must be many others having similar challenges. So Max set out to create Liebs Co to help many individuals just like him to be better accommodated for, but as well as having organizations to really gain the knowledge through learning. A lot of times organizations may just be unaware of the challenges individuals might be facing in their organization. So what Liebs Co does is ensure that there is a great training program in place, or great knowledge transfer in place to allow everyone to succeed and have equal opportunity. This was a very fascinating conversation that both allowed me to learn more about some of the challenges facing individuals in the workplace, but as well as ways organizations can accommodate and really allow for everyone to succeed. Because when employees are succeeding, so is the business. Yeah, Max, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I guess to start off, introduce yourself and then kind of speak what is Liebs Co and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, not a problem. So, thanks for having me too, Brandon. Um, I I founded Liebs Co because of my experiences living with a learning disability
Mhm.
and not being properly accommodated within the workplace. So, I know we go a bit far back, but when I was at Crestwood, I remember always struggling, and I wasn't diagnosed. I was always either in the a transition class
Mhm.
at the elementary level, and then when I went to the upper school, there just wasn't any accommodations. So I just remember not only struggling in school, but once I got accommodated, I was fine in school, but it never really happened in the workplace. So there's a long history of this, and there's a lot of build up from it because when you're so used to not like fending for yourself, but figure out the way that works for you so you can be successful. Excuse me. It's very difficult to explain to someone how you operate,
Mhm.
and that's where sometimes businesses didn't really understand when I would request for accommodations.
Mhm.
They would say, "Oh, you can't you can't write notes well." I'm like, "No, like I had dysgraphia. If I write something out, I won't be able to read it, and I prefer if someone would take notes for me." And they said,
Mhm.
"Well, you can do it. You are an able body." And I said, "Yeah, but if you go too quickly, I still can't keep up because
Mhm.
I'm writing, and you're going to the point where I'm going to forget it.
Mhm.
Not only forget what's being thrown at me because you're going at a quick pace, but you're going to you're going to make me not feel comfortable because I'm going to have to keep asking you for reinsurance that I got everything and that it's correct." So they viewed that as someone who, you know, is incapable because they're
Mhm.
not getting it right away. And we have this culture of buildup in a society that if you ask for reinsurance or help, that it's like, okay, they can't do it independently.
Mhm.
No, you can. You just need certain things, and that's where the hiccups came for me.
Mhm.
And it got to a boiling point in 2019
Mhm.
when I didn't disclose during an interview, and I got a job. I got a full time job,
Mhm.
and 2 weeks in, the employer pulls me aside and says, "Max, we need to talk." I'm like, "Okay." Go to his office, and he mentions to me that I'm annoying. I ask too many questions, and he wants to fire me. So I said to him, "Well, I have a learning disability." And he's like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me during the interview?" Excuse me. I said to him, "It's my personal decision to disclose, not only to disclose, but also I had had bad experiences with other managers." So he's like, "Okay, well, it's 2019. Everyone has a learning disability." So right there, he was pretty much implying to me that I am in a, like, you're putting me in a box, and you're saying that everyone has what I have, but we don't experience it the same. We have different strengths and skills. So right then and there, I felt like he didn't understand, and was kind of being really discriminatory. So I felt right there, I was like, okay, I have to get out. And not only at that same time as that, I also felt that I must not be the only one going through this, because other people who have the same disability, not even the same disability, the same experiences, who have a disability, definitely have gone through this before. So I was like, I must not be the only one. And then this is, I don't blame him for the way it worded it, but the way it sounded was like, "Do you have a plan?" Everyone who has a disability has somewhat of a plan to know how to navigate the world, but the saying, using the word "do" instead of what your strategies are, you're implying with the "do" that we're not like capable. Like, it's like, oh, you never thought of it. But if you ask what your strategies are, you'll find out, because we actually do have strategies. We're not explaining them like to you. So right then and there, I knew I had to leave, and not only leave and get out, but also want to do something for the disability community, because I'm not obviously not the only one who went through this. So that inspired me to start Liebs Co. to educate employers about disabilities, so that it can create an empathetic and inclusive workplace for all people.
And that's such an interesting story because, I mean, for a lot of businesses, you always hear of a story where, someone wanted a product because they experienced it, or they, had an idea, or they felt other people might have similar experiences they wanted to help or change. And I mean, that's the same thing with starting your organization. You're like, you know what? I always found in life, it's very rare the first thing, it's very rare that the first time something happens, it only happens to you. Like, there has to be a common occurrence. There's so many people in the world, but as well as your story sounds, is that it wasn't. What really sounds like it wasn't something first they were prepared for. It was almost like, it sounded like a shock. Like, what do you mean? And then also being a little discriminatory around. Well, it's up to you to figure it out. Like, hey, what? Like, it sounds like almost like you're like, oh, well, what are you? Like you said, what are you gonna do about it? What is your plan? Not like, oh, how can we accommodate, or how can we work together to solve this? Because one thing I hear about a lot, or especially a lot through my MBA and like working with a lot of organizations, was that when it comes to hiring, if you can make it past like once you get past the interview and they hire you, they like stuff about you. It's like, now you're supposed to work together to figure out the most success. And I know a lot of the literature around now is around like, once you have a good way of like making interviews accommodating, working with people, then by the time they're hired, it should be like I'd say like almost a teamwork thing to like, okay, we're together. We're together in this now. Let's figure this out together. Let's make this work out. And it sounds like, probably similar, probably similar to other people. It's like, oh, well, you don't fit with what we consider what we need. So we'll just give up. And I mean, your story is very impressive. Also very cool that you kind of started an organization around working with other businesses to figure this out. Because you can also see from the other side, like if you've never experienced this, it's like you don't know what you don't know. And I think now there's obviously a lot more communication around it. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things where you hear a story, we were like, oh, well, I'll need that in my company. And I like how you said, there's different levels of severity or different levels of accommodations or working with people to really make things as accessible as possible. Sometimes it may be very simple, different work tools, different processes. Sometimes it may be more complex, but there has to be a range in really making everything or everyone feel, I don't feel equal, but give everyone the ability to succeed in what they're doing. Have you found, you working with this starting your organization now. Have From when you started versus kind of today, have you seen a transition in how workplaces speak about it, or yeah, I guess to start off, like, have you seen a transition over your time how workplaces are speaking about it? Or where do you think there is a lot of change still required, in your opinion?
Okay, that's a big question
That's
because
a very loaded question.
yeah, very loaded. Yeah. So when I first started, I didn't even disclose because I was too young. I was working with you know,
Mhm,
with some sport organizations at the time, and I didn't disclose because I didn't realize my disability affected me in the workplace. I thought it was just
mhm.
something in school, but as a high school student, you don't think about that. You think about, oh, let's go have fun and do all the other things
Mhm,
that you do when you're young. But what I didn't realize is when I disclosed, because my mom actually told my employer because I introduced her,
mhm,
and he asked her why is Max not focused sometimes when we're giving him a lot of tasks. And she said, well, he has a learning disability, and when you throw a lot of tasks at him quickly, he will be overloaded and just go to the task that he remembers. So he's like, oh, so I have to break it down. She's like, yes, and that's when the switch flip for
mhm,
them. So they're like, okay, I have to do it differently, and it worked out well because that one boss understood, that
mhm,
one manager I had. He was really good to me,
mhm,
but at the same time, there was still the stigma because if I disclose when I disclosed, there were still like small things that
mhm,
was trying to be fixed, but it wasn't in the stages as it is now.
mhm,
For example, the AODA came out in 2005. I got diagnosed 4 years later, so there
mhm.
was no provincial guideline to really enforce the
Interesting. Mhm,
to enforce it. You had to accommodate, but it wasn't at like it was in its infancy,
mhm,
and people were still trying to figure it out, and they still are nowadays. There's every company slowly doing it, is still doing it because by 2025, everyone has to be fully accessible
mm,
in Ontario. But when you go back to my situation there, if when I disclosed, some companies didn't even have training about autism in the workplace.
mhm,
A lot of them that have learning disability training, stuff like certain areas like a
mhm,
different non-visible area disabilities. They
mhm,
had everything about visible
mhm,
because that was easy to see and
mhm,
easy to understand and comprehend. And that's not me saying like, oh yeah, like they're the well protected ones. No, they're still having their own battles they have to do
mhm,
to this day. But it was just they had more in place for them than it did
mhm,
for autism, for example,
mhm,
or in my case, a learning disability. So people would say to me when I would disclose, um, because it looked like I can do things, like I mentioned,
mhm,
oh, you can do that yourself, or if I asked for accommodation, I didn't even know that they had a duty to accommodate, even though um, I requested they had to request. So if they
mhm,
rejected me, I didn't. They couldn't uh, rightfully reject me unless there was undue hardship, and which
mhm,
there wasn't because my accommodation is so small compared to what it would cost the business.
mhm,
Especially since the business was a big business.
mhm,
It was one of the major companies in
mhm,
Toronto at the time. So it just didn't add up. But nowadays, you see the shift because the conversation has really changed, and it has changed even because of on Clubhouse because that app brought together
mhm,
everyone from different parts of the world who have a disability
mhm,
and live with a disability, and they would I would be part of these conversations. It's called the 15% group, and it's pushing forward these chats about not only identity first language,
Mhm.
and it's a person first language, but also like just the whole talk about ableism and the whole talk about um, inspiration porn. All
Mhm.
that stuff has been is starting is it's building, and companies are starting to understand that disability has been really been forgotten about because
Mhm.
it's a lot of it's not visible.
And I know that was a loaded question. That was a great answer, kind of breaking it down on how everything works. And I think what's really interesting um, is that, especially speaking of Clubhouse, I think a lot of these things is, and especially with like many even different aspects of anything in life, when you have an individual who, whether it be like a variety of things, who in your day to day life, for example, an organization, they may only this may only come up one or a few times if it's a small company within their whole life cycle of the business. But with the internet, it power to like have exemplified voices, kind of connect and have better discussions around that. It's always interesting to see, like, before the internet, you know what I mean? Like, it'd be probably very difficult to find a group of people to speak to who might have similar experiences or would have the ability to say, like, oh, like, in this situation, this is what I asked my employer, and they were able to, this is how I was able to ask my employer, this is how I was able to bring it up. And you're really thinking that without the applications like Clubhouse, without the ability to connect with like-minded individuals or individuals going through similar experiences, that would be such a difficult experience, even like 20 years ago, which always sounds like that's not that long ago, but like 20 years ago, there was literally no social media. And if you're like, oh, I had a similar experience, who could you really talk to? There wouldn't be that many people. You'd just be like, oh, it must just be me. But like Liebs Co, the idea was that, okay, there's many people facing this. This is constantly coming up. So there has to be a better solution to this. Have you found that this is a very topically with work from home? Have you found that due to COVID and a lot of organizations going online, that it's been, I don't know if easier is the right word, but maybe better or easier for an organization to be more accessible or be able to provide more accessibility, or because it's work from home now, does it cause some other issues that may not be as apparent?
That's a really good question. So I can only answer this from my own
Mm-hmm.
perspective because um, other people who live with disability might say something what works for them. For me, it's been a blessing in disguise because I don't do well in fast-paced environments. It's my brain has to process too much.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to work from home, do my own schedule, have a routine, and focus on my work at hand, I'm more productive actually than I would be at the office because as I don't feel like I need to socialize as much. I have a great dog who gets me to do that socialization. I have friends that
Mm-hmm.
from from being out with my dog and just meeting people that way. So I have my socialization, and I have, obviously my friends as well. But it's just like at the office place, I feel like you have to connect with your
Mm-hmm.
employees and constantly have to have a conversation when that's not necessarily the case. um, Also, just having an employer always constantly over my back sometimes would be stressful because I felt like I had to be always working. I couldn't be like taking breaks, which
Mm-hmm.
which really stressed me out. And most importantly, with my accommodation, excuse me, I wouldn't necessarily know if they would accept it. And also with the pandemic, I have found more tools to help me be more successful because I'm using stuff that helps me communicate, for example, or note take
Mm-hmm.
note taking. So like for emails, for example, a lot of people say, oh, you have to you write out the text email, and that's the way to go. That's normal. You gotta keep it that way. I write two words saying, or a few phrases, shall I say, saying, hi, Sarah, hope you had a great weekend. Please listen to the voice note attached for more information regarding your previous email. And I voice note all my emails to people.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And I send it to them because it's quicker for me. It doesn't take me that long to articulate what I want to say. And it's done in 20 minutes instead of taking me 2 hours to an hour and a half to write an email. like finish all my emails, I should say.
Yeah.
And then also for meetings, I use Otter AI, and it records and transcribes every meeting for me, so I don't need to have a note taker, or not only have a note taker, but also don't need to panic if I lose something because I know it's there. So it's really been beneficial for me, and I can see it being beneficial for other people who live with a disability as well. But it just depends on the person you speak to, what has it benefited the most.
And I mean, that's a great answer. I do think it's one of those things where when you always try to like summarize or group everyone together, that's exactly what the issue is. Sometimes it's like, well, if it's better for you, another individual might be much harder for them. So an organization might say like, oh, well, Max, it's easier for Max. I'm assuming everyone, it's going to be easier for everyone. And that just isn't the case. Just like everything, just like a lot of other things, it's really has to be accessible, but also to everyone so that they feel equal and have the ability to kind of choose what works best for them. I like what you said with voice notes for like with emails and stuff. I remember earlier on in my career, big company out of Kitchener-Waterloo being videoed, and their big thing with sales was that they would just send you a video as a sales pitch. They'd be like, "Hi, my name is Brendan," like, and pretty much say their email in text, but it was way more engaging. It was new at the time. And now I see a lot of companies using video as a different way because it's a little bit unique. But I always thought initially, like, oh, how will people, maybe have some similar thing, like how will people respond to this? How will people feel that it's not the conventional text on paper? From my experience for a few of these things, it's a lot of people enjoy it because it's a little more personal. Also, I know, especially if I'm typing emails fast, like sometimes if I'm being sarcastic or my tone, you can't really get tone through text either sometimes. And depending on how you write, that can be very difficult, especially I always found, especially for work emails, depending on your work environment. If some companies are much more, I say, laid back and casual with the tone of conversation, some are much more serious. So I always found, even when you were sending voice notes, it's nice to know, like, what is the tone? Oh, it's a lot easier to know, like, hey, this is friendly. Because I know sometimes, as you're aware, one word can mean so many different things depending on how it's interpreted. So it's nice to be able to have some, I say, more personality. So it's like, oh, I heard Max's voice. I'm more connected. I think that's also a cool thing as well that probably has been a benefit as well, as when you're connecting with people. It's like, oh, I have a deeper connection now because there's a person behind that voice, not just text in an email or text in the paper. But that's really cool how during a pandemic it's helped you as well as kind of setting your own schedule, kind of managing how you'd want to manage stuff. Have you found since starting your own organization? I know a lot of individuals, depending on what they prefer. Some people enjoy that control because they can, work when they have to work. They can take breaks, still get the same amount of work done, but kind of break up their day. Have you found that being able to manage your own schedule has made you more productive overall? Or have you found that now, because you have to manage everything, that your breaks or when you're relaxing might be a little bit more challenging because you always feel like you should be working?
That's a bit of both. It's a bit of both because I know on weekends I feel like I have to be working. On holidays, like just past Canada, I'm like, oh, I know no one's working, but I gotta be working. I gotta do something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it kicks in, and I know that's the entrepreneurial mindset, but I feel guilty if I don't. So
Mm-hmm.
I try to make sure, and I know I'm the only one really in the company other than our co-op
Mm-hmm.
student,
Mm-hmm.
Herjot, who's doing an unbelievable job. I honestly need to sure I don't burn out, because if I
Mm-hmm.
burn out, then there's gonna be no company. So I make sure
Yeah.
on Sundays I take the day off, and I just go grocery shopping and do whatever I feel like. I make sure that Sundays I don't do anything. I do stuff on Saturdays, but maybe an hour or two. But I just
Mm-hmm.
make sure that during the week I I work at least 8 hours. Anytime after 5 or 6, usually I cut off, and that's done. I don't look at my phone. I don't respond to
Mm-hmm.
emails, because I just, again, I need, your brain needs that refresher. Even if I have done like a half an hour, an hour break during the day, I still need that, because the way I operate is the way I operated in university. I would always do my work during the day, but when it got to like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., I wouldn't study.
Mm-hmm.
I would be done because my brain's tired. And I was taught by the resource center at Forest Hill when I was in high
Hmm.
school from one of the teachers who were there. She said, Max, no, it's hard for people to remember information or work after a certain point at night after working a long day. So at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., I would recommend you don't study afterwards because you might most likely forget information.
Hmm.
So I really kept that in my uh, schedule.
Hmm. That, what's really interesting is I was reading a book. I forget which one it was. I maybe it was Outliers or one of Malcolm Gladwell's book, and he said for like a lot of startups or a lot of individuals, they've seen a high proponent of people with varying levels of learning disabilities be very successful entrepreneurs in general. And I found that, I'm like, that's an interesting stat. I think it was a high percentage of compared to the national population. And what they were saying was that for a lot of individuals who may have had challenges, whether it be through school or through work, they've had to figure out ways for workarounds or ways to make things that fit their work style, their style more. They had to figure out ways to make things work for them. And because of that, they were very good at being problem solvers and solving a lot of issues and working in different unique ways. And due to that, they were able to be more successful entrepreneurs because they had to set their own schedules, because they had to, learn different. They had to look for workarounds that work best for them more so earlier on in their career, that has helped them later on in their career. And I think, and what you were saying is like university, I it was always one of those things where you're like, oh, like I'll study, I'll work all day, I'll pull an all nighter. But for certain individuals, that doesn't work. So you have to like really focus on developing a plan, focus on, okay, how am I going to get this done? And then from there, I mean, even like you say now, like you have what seems to be a relatively work life balance, and that's always like a word that's thrown around a lot. But it sounds nice that your schedule. You're like, look, past 6 o'clock or past 5 o'clock, I'm not going to be as productive. I'm aware, like you said, you're aware of that. It's not a surprise. You're like, I need to get everything done within these timeframes, but also set some time aside to really relax. And a lot of entrepreneurs I speak to, one thing you always hear a lot is like this grinding mentality. Like, I work 23 hours a day. I don't sleep. No days off. But then most people you speak to who are very successful, they have a very healthy relationship with taking breaks. I found the difference is like when they take a break, it's off your phone, completely disconnected from work. I found one of the big issues sometimes people face or I've seen is that you're like, I'm taking a break, but my phone's beside you. So you're never really relaxing. Your brain's still on work mode, so then you never feel fully relaxed. But I like how you spoke about like on Sundays is your day off and you're like, hey, you need time to relax. And I think that's for most people a very healthy thing to do and beneficial. But a lot of times when you hear about the grinding culture, working all the time, it can sometimes feel weird to take a break. But for most people I've spoken to, you need your breaks. It's so hard to be productive without a break, and it's so important to do that. So I know it's always challenging being an entrepreneur, like really figuring out kind of what to do next, kind of how to grow it, and kind of developing a brand or developing next steps. So, Liebs Co, you've been really obviously started during the pandemic. Did you start during the pandemic or prior to the pandemic? Or was this a pandemic thing that really brought the need to your attention more?
So it started like we I created the company in 2020 June.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a pandemic thing. Start. I had a
Mm-hmm.
long time to marinate on this. There's experiences when I went to Madagascar and saw the importance of education and really understood
Mm-hmm.
why uh, education is needed, not only for just in general, but like disability as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also I wanted to get back to disability. So
Mm-hmm.
it was always that in me. But when that experience happened in the workplace, everything just came together. And also the pandemic happened, and I had a lot of time to think. And I said, you know what? I get frustrated writing resumes and job cover letters. I It takes me forever. I can't be this stressed out because I feel guilty asking for people, and this is part of my own internalized
Mm-hmm.
ableism, to edit my papers, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
all the time. If you look back at my LinkedIn posts, I do mention it, and I mentioned it even on my Facebook one time. I had over like 30 editors in university. I had to ask. I got to the point where I would ask a lot of people because I felt bad going to the same person all the time because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was a burden. even though I did it in advance, it's still like you're that person's helping you to do your work,
Mm-hmm.
and you just feel bad because there's no real way other than say thank you, other than pay them, and it's still taking time out of their day, which I'm very grateful for because even though I made it for university, I know I wouldn't have been as successful without them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of the reason why I started, and I just started learning more and more, and I saw a disability coach because I was still struggling with
Mm-hmm.
disability. I still see a disability coach. He has helped me come up with not only further improve my strategies, but also give me new ones.
Oh,
So,
interesting. Mm-hmm.
so it's one of those things where I have grown more since the pandemic has started
Mm-hmm.
and realized what works for me and what doesn't work for me. Because I always thought you had to be in an office place, you had to have this corporate job, you had to, be making at least $4,000 to $5,000 a month
Mm-hmm.
and working for a company. And it wasn't working for me. Like the feel wasn't there. And once everyone started working from home, everything just started to calm for me, and it just felt right. It felt like I was doing the right thing because I'm doing this for not only for myself but for others, and I feel calm. Like I don't feel stressed
Mm-hmm.
out. So I feel stressed that I might not be having money coming often, but
Yeah.
I'm enjoying what I'm doing because I'm not in that situation where if I make a mistake, I'm going to get yelled at or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be, right? So it's been definitely been a good blessing in disguise. And with Liebs Co, I believe you mentioned like the launch part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Legitimately, we only started 2 months ago, so we're still fairly young,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and we're still trying to get our name out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slow build. If it came overnight and became a massive success, then it'd be awesome. But at the same time, it's I don't want to say it's not it's that it's not like possible and that it would continue to go in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
but you see with a lot of big businesses like I can't remember the eyewear company, but they did a year and a bit, and this is from Adam Grant's book, I believe, Give
Mm-hmm.
and Take, and they were researching how to make glasses cheap because every glass company, eyewear
Mm-hmm.
company, they're very expensive glassware. They're just saying, okay, we'll send you the frames, and you get the glass. I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember exactly, but they did a year of research into this, and they promoted it well. And within the first three days, they skyrocketed, and they're still going strong. But that's a rare case.
Yeah.
Most companies don't like go like that. So I wasn't expecting to be a huge success overnight.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be happy with just having the business support itself.
That's what you touched on. I think is really nice to hear. I think a lot of times being an entrepreneur is very stressful for other reasons because like you said, like when you take a day off, it's not like, oh, I'm just taking a day off. It's any time I'm not spending towards the business is not growing. Like you are what makes or breaks the company. But I like how you said that the stress is a little bit different now. Like before, you had stressors of being in the office, working for a company. Now, even if you, I mean, I'm assuming you're still probably still very stressful, still very busy. But I like how you said that. Now you're almost calm with like you're working on something you're passionate about, and that you feel it's more than just that paycheck or what you're supposed to do. It's I'm contributing to something I want to contribute, but also you're making a difference. And I think that like I said, calmness or the ability to be like, look, there's something bigger than me is always nice to hear. Cause I think a lot of times you always hear like to be a successful entrepreneur, to be a successful business, making money is always good. You always want to make money. You can never say like, oh, I'm not doing this for no money. You need to live. Everyone
Yeah.
has to live somewhere. But being able to say, look, if this takes, a year to get huge, 2 years to get huge, 3 years to be massive, I'm still happy doing the work I'm doing. And I think that is one of the nicest things about being an entrepreneur, having your own business, is that once you can get to a point of having, like you said, business to sustain itself, being able to pay the bills, just being happy, be like, oh, I'm doing something I truly enjoy, no matter how long it takes within reason. You're like, oh, I'm still contributing to something that is greater than me, but also happy when you, and you can tell when you're having a sales call or when you're talking to someone, just being like, I am truly passionate about this. This is something I'm excited for. And the way you, obviously, the way you speak your history, kind of all you've been through, it's the same thing. Like, it's almost relieving how it sounds to be like, okay, you're working on something first that you can control how you work. So a lot of those stressors you had in the office are no longer stressors, but also something where you're helping other people who may have had very similar things within their career and throughout their career. Have you have you since starting a business and working with other organizations, have you seen that, what are, I guess this is a good question. Is there some common misconceptions within the, D is it still considered under DEI, like DEI inclusion? Have you seen some common misconceptions around it? Or has there been a few big things that you've been like, wow, that's actually not how it works off the top of your head?
So a lot of companies have DEI and they get confused what we are doing.
Mm-hmm,
They think I'm a DEI consultant and I don't feel like I'm qualified for that, and
mm-hmm,
not that I don't feel like I'm qualified for that. That's a realm I don't want to really jump into,
mm-hmm,
just because I am not educated enough, and not only
mm-hmm,
not educated enough, it just doesn't feel me. I like teaching, I like educating. I don't want to jump into a realm that makes me feel uncomfortable. If that makes sense.
mm-hmm,
So some companies think that when we come to them and say, "Hey, like, would you be interested in learning more about what we do?" They think it's a DEI consultant, but that's not exactly what we're doing. We're trying to teach you more how not only be aware of
mm-hmm,
a disability, but also strategies and some of the impacts, some of the things you do can
mm-hmm,
um, impact people who live with a disability or are disabled
mm-hmm,
or is autistic. It just
mm-hmm,
depends on the person you're interacting with, and that's what I have noticed.
mm-hmm,
But at the same time, it has allowed me to connect with people who are also in the DEI space, the company. So, as myself personally and the
mm-hmm,
company, so that we have that connection. So we're not fully left in the dark, so to speak.
mm-hmm,
We have that connection, and not only that connection, but it also allows us to help businesses if they say, "Oh, we need a DEI consultant." We can refer
mm-hmm.
one another. So
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm,
it's been that's what's been the positive from it, and that's what I have realized
mm-hmm,
from starting the company is that's what we've gathered. Like we've done some
mm-hmm,
collaborations with a great DEI consultant named Katerina Riviera. I hope I didn't pronounce her name right, but she goes by Blindness Latina. Uh,
mm-hmm,
she does a great job. You can
mm-hmm,
check her out on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and she's really good at what she does, and
mm-hmm,
she's been a huge help. So the same with Kelly Braun Johnson. She does
mm-hmm,
completely inclusive. So there's a lot of people who are in that space that we we have we have connections with.
mm-hmm. And that's always, I like what you said in regards to, your lane, like, hey, this is what we focus on. And you're saying like, hey, we don't do everything. This is kind of what we're really focusing on. This is really what I'm passionate on. This is what I'm experienced with. I think a lot of times, and you've probably seen this, is when you speak about DEI, it's like people sometimes lump that all together, like, oh, there's like a one turnkey solution for everything, just because, whether it be an organization just saying, oh, we're inclusive because we do this one thing. But like you were saying, many other things is that there's many steps. It's not something simple. I think it's like many other things where it's like, oh, because I'm, from the sales world, it's like we have a sales process. Well, there's like 1,000 different jobs in sales. You have your outbound approach, your inbound approach. You have, for North American companies, you do this. I think it's very similar when it comes to DEI. Is that there's not a most time a one. There's never a one shot one size fits all. There's always has to be a education and continue learning. Um, so as the organization grows, as more and more businesses, from what I've seen, are more open to having these discussions, are more conscious of like what it means to really be inclusive and have their workplace accessible to everyone. What if an organization is, whether it be, I would say nervous, but like interested in learning more about this, or kind of getting more involved, or making sure their workplace is accessible, what are some of like the good first steps to do, or kind of get started in their journey into this type of accessibility world?
So I would say first off, make your website fully accessible. So there's a, you can always get those widgets that help you, but it doesn't really make your website accessible, and that's because it's an HTML link. It does do the job. It does a fantastic job. But if you want to be fully accessible, you got to go to one of those companies that do it live for you, so it's not automated, shall I say? But it still does its job. I'm not saying it's not great. It's a huge advancement. You just gotta choose the one that works for you. Um, Another thing is, especially during your hiring and application processes,
Mhm.
you gotta ensure that you use an accessible job portal. Not only use an accessible job portal, but you make the questions um, easy reading level, because not everyone has a strong reading level. And one of the things, and make them all, before I get to that, one of the things that they really should do as well is not put amount of years of experience needed, because is someone who lives with autism or is on the spectrum, they may be like, oh, like I have to have that many years experience, because they might, depending on where they are on the spectrum, they may think it literally, and they won't apply even though they have the skill set. So you have to realize what terms and the usage of words you put on the application, because it may deter people that from you from finding a good candidate. But the main thing that I found would be a huge help is two things, and it's just from my personal perspective and experience. Giving the interview questions in advance to all applicants, doesn't matter if it is someone who has a disability or not, because it allows you to prepare. Like when you go to do a presentation, or you have a big meeting, or you have a big speech to give. What do? You always prepare. You have something to prepare for. This By doing this, you allow each candidate to come with the best foot forward instead of trying to think of answers on the spot. That's what I never knew I could do, but now I realize I can do it, and I even did it during our hiring process with uh, our co-op student Herja, and we did for all the applicants, and I believe it went really well. And from the feedback I got from her, it went well, because it made her feel a lot more prepared for the interview and felt comfortable going in, because it was calm. It wasn't pressureful, because you write down your thoughts first, and you can just have it neatly organized, and it just allows you to have some peace of mind. I feel.
Yeah.
But the most important, I feel, to ask anyone, be visible or not, if they need accommodations. And that, even if they don't disclose and they say that they don't feel comfortable, it just shows that you're taking that step and saying, we're here to help you. That's what it symbolizes to me, because if someone asks me that in the interview, I would be like, yes, of course. Me personally, I would say yes, of course, because I become more open about it. It just depends what level the person's at the comfort level. They may never disclose, but at least you're showing to the person that you're willing to help them out and make sure that they can do their job to the best of their abilities, because you care about them. That's the most important, and that's what really needs to be shown. I feel more as companies learn more about how to be obviously inclusive to people, more inclusive to people with disabilities, and or disabled people, depending on which language you want it to use. and of course, obviously, one of the things, last things I would say is
Mhm.
make sure you're having the interviews in accessible spaces. So that would be like, ensuring there's proper elevators, proper uh, disabled parking,
Mhm.
and even now, one of the best ways to do it to have your interviews be accessible is just do it via Zoom because everyone can, or Google Meets because everyone can access, and
Mhm.
it makes it easier. So those little things, uh, I think, should be continuing on
Mhm.
after the pandemic.
Mhm. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And what it really sounds like, I think it's really true, is a lot of times it's just asking those questions. Like you said, even if they say no because they might not be comfortable disclosing it. And that's like with many different things. Like they might not be comfortable disclosing by just saying, hey, is there anything you need for accessibility? Kind of, is there any assistance you would need? Just asking those questions shows like, hey, we're not just saying what's written down, we're consciously thinking this through. And then I would assume, similar to other things, is once you ask the question, let's say they got hired, they probably feel more likely or feel better or feel like they're able now to say, hey, actually, there is some stuff I would maybe need assistance in. Or, and like you said, sometimes it's a very small thing that costs the business next to nothing and can be such a huge difference on productivity, on the outcomes for that employee, uh, and everything else. And also, you said with the interview space, I know for a lot of organizations I work with that were very conscious of that was, hey, you have the choice. You can come in if you want. You can do it online. You can meet here, meet there. Just give those options because, like you said, for some individuals, getting to a location might be challenging, might cause undue stress, especially if the job's, we're working remote and you tell someone to come to the office. Maybe, especially now, I know with a lot of things I work with COVID, a lot of individuals just might feel stressed going onto public transit if they don't have a car just to get downtown. And that's really not like, that's not something you should hold against someone, especially for a job that wouldn't require it and or could be easily done online in a setting. And I also like how you said with it, sending interview questions. That one was always interesting to me because I, I know for some individuals that's a huge stress factor. And even if they have the best answers, just the idea of being like, what could they ask next? Am I comprehending it well? Like, is this what they're actually asking? And most of the questions you do ask during interviews are never that secretive. It's never like, I know they always show in those movies where they're like, you're in a blender. How do you escape? And most interview questions are unlike that. It's like, tell me about yourself. Give us an experience of this, or very questions that shouldn't really be that secretive, but also give some value to the interview and interview to prepare beforehand as well. But also, if you're holding the interview, I think giving them the questions also shows how they prepare. So you get an experience of if we're going to give them an assignment for a presentation, how will they perform? Because I know for certain individuals, they may not be the best person on the fly for coming up with answers. And some people may just be super charismatic, but can't prepare anything as like, are not good at preparing as well because they're just on the spot or they're making up as they go. So I really think it's the best of both worlds. But Max, thank you so much for taking this time. Very interesting story, very unique business, especially with the change you're trying to make. If people want to reach out, kind of get a hold of you, what's the best way to get in contact and follow your journey?
First, I'd like to say thank you for having me, Brendan. I truly appreciate it. The best way, obviously, is to connect on either LinkedIn at my profile, Max Lieberman. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Liebs Co. And you can email us at info@liebsandco.com and check out our website at www.liebsandco.com.